A court had to decide which family member was telling the truth. The case lasted a year. Both sides had lawyers. Both sides presented evidence, witness statements, photographs, medical observations. Both sides claimed to be protecting the same person. On November 10th, the court made its decision. 20 days later, 4 people were dead. The person at the center of this dispute was a 34-year-old man who could barely speak. He had a rare genetic condition that required someone to care for him every hour of every day. He couldn't advocate for himself. He couldn't clearly say what he wanted or who he trusted. His mother said she was protecting him from her son. Her son said he was protecting his brother from their mother. The court sided with the mother, appointed her guardian, gave her full legal authority over his life. The son was granted visitation rights. Supervised. Court scheduled. He could see his brother, but he couldn't make decisions for him anymore. The legal dispute was over. On December 10th, the court terminated the protection order that had been in place. The settlement said the family could coexist under these terms. The weapons prohibition that had required the son to surrender 53 firearms 9 months earlier was lifted. 20 days later, on December 30th, police received a concerning email. An attorney called for a welfare check at a home on Mercer Island, one of the wealthiest suburbs in America, where the median home value exceeds $1 million. When officers peered through the windows, they saw a body. Inside, they found the mother and her older son, both dead from gunshot wounds. 4 firearms recovered in the home, 1 more in a vehicle outside. 15 miles away, in another home, police found the younger son, the one who couldn't speak for himself. The one everyone claimed to be protecting Anne, the older son's wife. Both had been shot multiple times. The medical examiner determined that the older son had killed 3 people, then taken his own life. This is a story about what happens when both sides believe they're right, when evidence is ambiguous, when a legal system has to choose between 2 competing realities, neither of which can be proven beyond doubt. When the courts resolve a dispute, but the psychological conflict remains. This is the story of a family that fractured over the question of how to care for someone they all claim to love. A fracture that widened over years, that survived police involvement, court proceedings, guardianship battles, and settlement agreements. A fracture that ended on a quiet Tuesday morning in December, in 2 homes separated by 15 miles and connected by a belief that would not bend. Mercer Island sits in Lake Washington between Seattle and Bellevue, connected to the mainland only by Interstate 90 bridges. To reach it, you have to choose to go there. You can't pass through on the way to somewhere else. The island is home to approximately 25,000 people, 90% of whom hold college degrees. The median household income is over $200,000. The median home value is $2.5 million. It is a place where children attend some of Washington's highest-ranked schools, where streets are quiet and tree-lined, where a community pool is maintained by residents who care about such things, where people practice yoga and walk their Havanese dogs through neighborhoods that smell like money and safety. On December 30th, 2025, at 10:45 in the morning, this peace was broken by a welfare check. The person who called the police was an attorney. The attorney had received an email that morning, a concerning email from someone associated with the family living at 8400 block Southeast 46th Street. The attorney didn't feel comfortable with what the email contained. Something about it raised fears for the occupants' safety. Police arrived within minutes. Danielle Cuvillier was 80 years old. She had lived on Mercer Island for years. Neighbors described her as vibrant despite her age. She helped maintain the community pool. She practiced yoga. She was often seen walking her Havanese dog through the neighborhood, greeting people, living a quiet life. She had a son named Mackenzie. He was 45 years old. He lived in Issaquah, about 15 miles away, with his wife named Harmony. Harmony was a physical therapist. Clients who had worked with her described her as having a level of compassion and care that was, they said, rarely seen in a human being. She enjoyed hiking, she cooked. She was someone who helped people heal. And then there was Nick, the younger son. Nick Cuvillier was 34 years old. Nick had a rare genetic condition called Angelman's syndrome. His entire life, for 34 years of it, had been defined by an extraordinary need. He required someone to care for him every single moment, every hour, every day. Without exception, he was mostly nonverbal. He couldn't advocate for himself. He couldn't say what he wanted or who he trusted or what hurt or what felt safe. He needed help eating. He needed help with hygiene. He needed help with mobility. He needed constant supervision all day. Every night, research shows that 96% of people with Angelman's syndrome cannot be left alone. Not for 5 minutes, not for an errand, not for a break. 97% of their caregivers experience chronic stress. Most experience fatigue, anxiety, depression. For 34 years, Nick's parents had shared this burden. When his father died in November of 2018, that arrangement changed. Danielle became his primary caregiver alone. And something shifted, not immediately, not dramatically, but beginning in 2023, court documents would later note. The relationship between Danielle and Mackenzie began to deteriorate. Disagreements emerged over Nick's care, medical treatment, where he should live, how his life should be structured. Neither sibling was willing to compromise. Both believed they understood what Nick needed. Both believed the other was wrong. Both believed they were protecting him. Something shifted in 2023. By 2024, it had become impossible to ignore. Mackenzie Mac, as people called him, began to express concerns about Nick's safety. He attended court hearings. He filed declarations. He described what he claimed to have witnessed during visits to his mother's home. He alleged that Danielle had, on multiple occasions, lost her temper with Nick, that she had struck him, that he had seen injuries on his brother's body that he couldn't explain. He alleged that Danielle sometimes appeared at his home visibly intoxicated. He described his father as the primary caregiver for Nick before his death. He said that after their father died, his mother struggled. That she was, in his words, in a poor mental state. That he had become increasingly concerned about Nick's physical condition, his stress-related behaviors, his access to medical care while living with their mother. Danielle responded differently. She said her concerns were about Mac. She described him as unpredictable, aggressive. She noted that he owned a significant number of firearms. 53 of them, in fact. She expressed deep concern that a man she believed was behaving aggressively, with access to that many weapons, was trying to take control of her son's care. Both had evidence, both had witnesses, both had documents supporting their version of events. Then came January 16th, 2025. Mac had scheduled a visit with Nick at Danielle's home, but the visit was cancelled. Danielle refused to let him come. Mac decided to go anyway. He needed to check on Nick. He needed to see for himself that his brother was okay. When he arrived at the house, Danielle initially refused to let him enter. She refused to let him see Nick. Mac called 911. Police arrived at the Mercer Island home. What happened next, the exact details was never fully disclosed. But police reviewed the scene. They listened to the 911 call. They made a decision. They arrested Danielle. For domestic violence, she was released the next day. The specific charges were never disclosed, but she had been arrested. Police had seen something in that interaction that concerned them enough to take action. For Mac, this was validation. Even the police saw what he saw. Even outside authorities agreed that his mother's behavior warranted intervention. For Danielle, this was trauma. Her own son had called police on her. She had been arrested in her own home. When Mac left that day, he took Nick with him. Nick moved into the home in Issaquah with Mac and Harmony. He stayed there for 14 days. During those 14 days, something happened. Mac reported that Nick's physical condition improved, that his stress-related behaviors decreased, that his mood stabilized. Harmony corroborated this. She submitted a statement describing improvements in Nick's mood, in his injuries, in his overall well-being. But on January 30th, police returned Nick to Danielle's home. Under court order, the legal system had intervened. The legal system had decided that Nick should go back to his mother. For Mac, this decision must have felt impossible to accept. He believed his brother was being harmed. He had taken his brother away. He had documented improvements. And then the courts forced him to return Nick to the situation he believed was dangerous. On January 17th, the day after that confrontation, Nick signed a new legal document. A power of attorney naming Mac as his agent. Revoked his previous power of attorney, the one naming Danielle. But Nick was mostly nonverbal. He had significant cognitive impairments. Did he understand what he was signing? Could he truly consent to this document? That became a central question in the legal battle that followed. By January 28th, Danielle had filed for a vulnerable adult protection order. She asked the court to protect Nick from her son. She asked the court to force Mac to surrender his firearms. The court agreed that same day. Temporary protection order issued. Mac was ordered to surrender all his weapons. He complied. 53 firearms, carefully packed, handed over to police. But something remained unaccounted for. Months later, a compliance review would note that at least one firearm purchase appeared to be missing from his records. The court noted it, then did nothing. For 11 months, the legal system tried to resolve this conflict. February, March, April, June, July, August, September, October, November, protection orders were extended. Court hearings were scheduled. Declarations were filed. A compliance review in March found that at least one firearm was unaccounted for in Mac's surrender records. The court noted it, ordered no further hearings. In August, the parties reached a settlement. The specific terms were never made public, but both sides agreed to something. On November 10th, the court made its decision. Danielle was appointed full guardian and conservator for Nick. She had complete legal authority over his personal and financial affairs. Mac was granted visitation rights. Supervised. Court scheduled. The legal battle was over. For Danielle, this was validation. The court had agreed with her. Her son's allegations were insufficient. She would continue as Nick's caregiver and decision-maker. For Mac, this was the final loss. He had fought for 11 months. He had presented evidence. He had documented concerns. And the court had decided he was wrong. The court had decided that his mother, the person he believed, was mistreating his brother, would have complete control over Nick's life. On December 10th, the court closed the vulnerable adult protection order. The settlement resolved the legal dispute. Therefore, the order was no longer necessary. The restriction that had required Mac to give up his firearms in January was also lifted. 20 days had passed since the order was removed when the email arrived. December 30th, early morning. An attorney representing Danielle received an email. The content was never disclosed, but it raised concerns. Fears for the occupants' safety. The attorney contacted the police. At 10:45 in the morning, police arrived at 8400 Southeast, 46th Street, Mercer, Islington. They approached the home, looked through the windows, saw someone inside. They entered the residence. Danielle Cuvillier was found inside. She had sustained fatal injuries. Mackenzie Williams was there as well. His injuries were self-inflicted. 4 firearms were recovered inside the home. 1 additional firearm was found in a vehicle. The police immediately realized something. Nick wasn't at the Mercer Island house. Where was Nick? Mercer Island police contacted Issaquah police, asked them to conduct a welfare check at Mac's residence, the home where Mac lived with his wife Harmony. The same home where Nick had stayed for 14 days in January and shown improvement. At 11:37 in the morning, less than 2 hours after the first discovery, Issaquah police entered the home. They found Nick Cuvillier and Harmony Danner inside. Both had passed away. The King County Medical Examiner would later confirm the manner and cause of their deaths. Danielle Cuvillier, homicide. Multiple gunshot wounds to the head. Mackenzie Williams, suicide. Self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Dominic Cuvillier, homicide. Multiple gunshot wounds. Harmony Crystal Danner, homicide. Multiple gunshot wounds. 3 people murdered, 1 suicide. The perpetrator was the person who believed he was protecting his brother. The person who had fought in court for 11 months. The person who had lost the legal battle. The person whose access to firearms had been restored 20 days before. The question that reframes everything before it is this. If Mac believed his mother was harming Nick truly, genuinely believed this, why did he kill Nick? If he killed his brother to protect him from abuse, he removed the one person he was trying to save from the situation he perceived as harmful. If he was wrong about the abuse, if his belief was unfounded or distorted, then certainty about danger that didn't exist led him to murder his family. Either way, the brother Mac claimed to be protecting was dead, and the legal system that had made its decision 20 days prior now faced the consequences of that decision. The settlement that was supposed to resolve conflict had resolved nothing. The court order that was supposed to create stability had preceded mass death by 3 weeks. The police had 4 bodies and 1 clear perpetrator. But the investigations that followed revealed something more complicated than a simple narrative of violence. The sequence of events was reconstructed. Williams had killed his mother at her Mercer Island home sometime late Monday evening or early Tuesday morning. Then he had traveled to Issaquah, killed his brother Nick and his wife, Harmony, at his own home, then returned to Mercer Island and taken his own life. But the exact timing remained unclear. The precise moment each death occurred was never definitively established. What triggered the violence that particular day, whether it was the upcoming scheduled return of Nick, or some other precipitating factor, or simply a decision made weeks before finally acted upon, would never be known. The medical examiner could determine cause of death, but investigators could not determine sequence. They could not establish motive with certainty. They could only reconstruct the skeletal facts of what happened. And those facts created a paradox that no investigation could resolve. Court documents stated explicitly that the competing allegations between Danielle and Mac were disputed and had not been fully adjudicated at the time of the deaths. This means that no court had ever held an evidentiary hearing to determine whether Mac's allegations of abuse were true, whether Danielle had actually struck Nick, whether she had been intoxicated during his care, whether Nick's improved condition during his 2 weeks with Mac was evidence of prior abuse, or simply the result of environmental change. The Adult Protective Services investigation that had been opened in January when Nick stayed with Mac, its findings were never disclosed. What did APS determine? Did they find evidence supporting Mac's allegations? Did they find evidence refuting them? Did they find the situation unclear? The answer to those questions mattered. It mattered enormously. But the answer was never made public. This created an impossible situation for interpretation. If Apps found evidence that Danielle had abused Nick, then the court's decision to appoint her as guardian was questionable. And Mac's belief that his brother was in danger would have been validated. But his response killing Nick still resulted in the death of the person he was trying to protect. If Apps found no evidence of abuse, then Mac's allegations were unfounded or distorted. His certainty about danger that didn't exist drove him to murder. But the public would never know this, because APS findings remain confidential. If Apps' findings were inconclusive, then both sides had a point. Danielle had caregiving concerns that warranted court oversight. Mac had protective concerns that warranted investigation. But neither concern justified mass murder. In each scenario, we're left with the same unbridgeable gap. Mac believed something with such certainty that he killed for it. Whether that belief was accurate or not, the outcome was identical. For people dead, the weapons compliance issue remained equally unresolved. In March, the court found that at least one firearm purchase was unaccounted for in Mac's surrender records. This was a red flag. It suggested that despite surrendering 53 weapons, he had obtained at least one additional firearm and either failed to disclose it or deliberately concealed it. The court noted this finding, but the court took no action beyond noting it. Then in December, when the protection order was terminated based on the settlement, the weapons prohibition was automatically lifted. Mac's legal right to possess firearms was restored. Where did the guns used in the murders come from? Were they the weapon that was unaccounted for in March? Were they purchased between December 10th, when the prohibition was lifted, and December 30th, when the murders occurred? Were they obtained illegally? The police investigation determined that Williams was the perpetrator. That much was clear from the evidence. But the deeper investigation into how this sequence of events became inevitable, into what decisions at what points might have changed the outcome, into whether the system had failed that investigation could not provide answers. What the investigation did provide was a timeline. And that timeline showed something that couldn't be unseen. December 10th, protection order terminated. Weapons prohibition lifted. December 29th. Scheduled visitation exchange. Nick supposed to be returned to Danielle that evening. December 30th. Concerning email received in early morning, police discover for bodies. 20 days from weapons prohibition restoration to mass murder. 50 days from guardianship loss to mass murder. A year of legal proceedings. A year of competing allegations. A year of court involvement. And at the end of that year, 4 people were dead. The legal system had made its decision on November 10th. On December 30th, the consequences of that decision became irreversible. The King County Medical Examiner issued its determinations on December 31st. For deaths, 3 homicides, 1 suicide. Case closed from a law enforcement perspective. Mackenzie Williams killed his mother. his brother, his wife, then took his own life. The investigation concluded no outstanding suspects, no ongoing threat to public safety. The perpetrator was deceased. From a legal standpoint, the case was resolved. But resolution and conclusion are different things. On January 1st, Danielle's surviving family members issued a statement. They said they were in a state of shock, grief, and utter disbelief. They asked for time and space to mourn appropriately. They said they would release a full statement when they had time to process this devastating sequence of events. As of January 3rd, no further statement had been released. They were still processing. Danielle was 80 years old. She had lived on Mercer Island for years. She had helped maintain the community pool. She had practiced yoga. She had walked her dog through quiet streets. She had raised her sons. She had cared for her younger son for 34 years. She was killed by her older son. Nick Cuvillier was 34 years old. He had never lived independently. He had never made major decisions for himself. His entire life had been structured around the care he needed, provided by family members who loved him and disagreed fundamentally about how to love him. He was killed by his older brother. Harmony Danner was 44 years old. She was a physical therapist. Clients described her as having compassion that was rarely seen in human beings. She had supported her husband in his legal battle. She had witnessed improvements in Nick during his stay. She had believed in Mac's concerns and stood by him. She was killed by her husband. Mackenzie Williams was 45 years old. He had fought in court for 11 months. He had presented evidence of what he believed he had witnessed. He had lost the legal battle. He had been granted only visitation rights. He had access to firearms restored 20 days before his death. He killed 3 people and then took his own life. The community impact rippled outward. Neighbors on Mercer Island expressed shock that something like this could happen on their quiet street. Harmony Asiachi Piki Sporchis and Spineful Theory lost someone they described as genuinely compassionate. The Mercer Island community lost residents. The city of Issaquah experienced a tragedy within its boundaries. But the closest impact was internal. It was psychological. It was the kind of impact that doesn't resolve with legal closure. The family members surviving this tragedy had lost people. They had lost Danielle and Nick to sudden death. They had lost Mac to his own violence. They carried questions that no investigation could answer. If they knew the outcome of the Adult Protective Services investigation, might their understanding be different? If they knew where the firearms came from, might that change something? If they could see inside Mac's mind in those final hours, if they could understand what he believed and why he believed it, would that bring closure, or would it deepen the wound? These are the questions that remain after legal resolution. Because legal resolution addressed one question: what happened? But it did not address the questions that matter more. Why did it happen? Could it have been prevented? At which decision point, at which moment, did the future become fixed? Court documents state that the competing allegations were disputed and had not been fully adjudicated. That notation sits in the file now. A legal acknowledgement that we will never know with certainty who was telling the truth about Nick's care, about the abuse allegations, about whether Nick was safer with Danielle or with Mac. The court made a decision anyway. Courts must decide, even in ambiguity, even without complete information, even knowing that the losing party will experience their decision as catastrophic. November 10th, the court decided. December 30th, the consequence became irreversible. And now, what remains is not resolution but a different kind of knowledge. The knowledge that a year of legal proceedings didn't prevent tragedy, that court orders didn't create safety, that settlement agreements didn't bring peace, that sometimes legal closure and actual closure are two entirely different things, and that the person left, standing at the end of the legal battle validated by courts, granted guardianship, declared the right choice was also the person who died first on December 30th. Court documents state that the competing allegations were disputed and had not been fully adjudicated. That means we will never know with certainty who was telling the truth about Nick's care. We will never know if William's allegations of abuse were accurate, if Danielle struck her son, if she was intoxicated during his care. We will never know if Danielle's concerns about Williams were valid, if his behavior truly was unpredictable and aggressive, or if her fear was a response to a son she couldn't control. We will never know what the Adult Protective Services investigation found, because those records remain confidential. We will never know where the firearms came from that were used on December 30th. We will never know what Williams was thinking in those final hours. Whether he believed he was saving Nick from abuse, or whether the belief had fractured into something else entirely. What we do know is this: both sides had evidence. Both sides had witnesses. Both sides believed they were protecting someone vulnerable. Both sides were willing to fight in courts, through lawyers, with declarations and character letters and allegations. And the legal system chose one side, made a decision, granted guardianship, limited visitation. The legal system was right to make a decision. Courts cannot function in perpetual ambiguity. They must choose. They must declare one party the guardian, the other the visitor, winner and loser. But what the legal system could not do was make that decision safe. Because the loser in this case was someone who genuinely believed rightly or wrongly that his brother was in danger. Someone who had fought for 11 months. Someone who had documented his concerns. Someone who had temporarily removed his brother from the situation. Someone who had lost everything. And then, 20 days after losing the legal fight, he had access to firearms restored. Research shows that certain combinations create danger, significant loss, belief in urgent threat that cannot be stopped legally, access to lethal means, social isolation, the belief that violence is the only remaining option. Williams exhibited those combinations. The system identified some of them. The March compliance review flagged the missing firearm, but the system took no action beyond noting it. The system terminated the protection order in December, not because risk had diminished, but because a settlement had been reached. Procedurally correct, substantively dangerous. This is not to say the system failed catastrophically. This is not to say violence was obviously preventable. Violence is difficult to predict. Psychology is complex. Family systems are opaque. But this case illustrates something true about human systems, about courts and protections and decisions made in ambiguity. Sometimes the legal resolution of a conflict does not resolve the psychological conflict. Sometimes someone can win in court and still feel like they have lost everything. Sometimes the person granted guardianship is the first to die. Sometimes certainty about right action, whether that certainty is accurate or delusional, is powerful enough to end lives. Nick Cuvillier could not speak for himself, could not say what he wanted, could not advocate for his own safety. His mother and his brother fought over what was best for him, each with evidence, each with conviction, each certain they were right. The court decided. 20 days later, Nick was dead, killed by the brother who believed he was protecting him. The question that remains is not what happened. The question is, when two people who both claim to love someone hold opposite beliefs about that person's safety, when evidence is ambiguous, when legal systems must choose without certainty what happens to the vulnerable person in the middle. This is what happens